think it's time to start. My name is Ken Wood. I'm the director of CourseSource, and here to talk about the hidden costs of sourcing e-learning for your LMS. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah? Got this very old school microphone, and it's a good thing I'm not going to break into karaoke at any time soon. An alternative title for this talk could have been, are you getting value for money from off-the-shelf e-learning? The first question I want to ask the audience is, do you know what I mean by off-the-shelf e-learning? Yeah? How many people here have their own LMS or they're buying an LMS? Okay, great. How many people here are using an LMS that the vendor provides? So you're just getting like a Skillsoft solution where the LMS and everything is bundled together. Is that anybody here? A couple people, okay. And how many people are making their own courses to put in whatever LMS they've got? Is that anyone? Okay, interesting. Some people doing all three, so that's interesting. Oh. So, one thing I was going to talk about is why buy off the shelf? So I was going to ask you for the reasons. The first reasons come up already, but I'm going to ask the audience for some other reasons why you might buy off the shelf courses. Anybody want to contribute? Anything else? Yes, the knowledge and experience that other people can provide, other professional publishers can provide. Yes? Any other ones? What? So I guess that would be your point. It's sort of potentially also more interactivity because professionally developed courses, they have more time to put into developing the interactive parts. The other side is instant delivery. If you need something right away, it's going to take a while to develop. So if you need it quickly, you get instant delivery off the shelf. And another thing is the wide range of content. There's a much wider, obviously, range of courses available off the shelf. So why create your own? For people who are creating their own, some people are obviously doing that. Obviously, you can. If there's nothing available off the shelf for what you need to do, that's one reason. Is there any other reasons? That's great. Contextualization, yes, that's good to make it more relevant to you. Privacy, yeah. Privacy, confidentiality. If there's confidential information that you're going to be teaching, or trade industry. Let's say secrets isn't the right word, but you want to keep it to yourself. Oh yeah, that's true, yes. Any other ones? Interesting that nobody said the cost, because a lot of people think that developing in-house is cheaper, so they think there's no hard cost because you've got people doing it already. But often it's not true because there is a cost of the people that you've got, but there's no necessarily budget cost to that. And that goes along the same thing. You don't have to keep paying for the content. Other reason might be that you need to own it. You need to actually own it for commercial reasons. You may be wanting to sell it to customers or something like that where there's a copyright issue. And I'm sure you've seen around here today with all the different learning tools out there for developing content, tools like Gomo and other tools, it's becoming much easier to build your own courses anyway. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have the subject matter expertise, but it's out quite easy, getting much better to build interesting courses. So I'm going to make some predictions about off-the-shelf versus custom learning in the future, and that I think the biggest competitor to most publishers will be companies creating their own e-learning. A lot of people worry about what the competition is if you're in the publishing business, of your competitors, but more and more companies are developing their own courses. So the off-the-shelf vendors need to respond to that. And I'll get to that in just a minute. In order to respond to that, I think that we're going to see a lot more of editable content in the future, so that you will be buying off the shelf, but it will be easy to customize the off-the-shelf products. Gone are the days where you can only buy it in this format, and if you want any changes made, you have to go back to the publisher to get the change made. It's now turning into a much more crossover, almost a merging of the off-the-shelf versus bespoke worlds. And I think we're going to see a lot more the rise of very, very specialist niche publishers, because the standard stuff is so ubiquitous now. There's so much of, you know, diversity, compliance, health and safety things out there where the publishers are going to start looking at is things that are very specialist and very require a lot of knowledge that you wouldn't be able to do yourselves. So what are the costs of finding off the shelf? Off the shelf is going to continue to play a part, whether that's editable off the shelf or just regular off the shelf. One of the costs, of course, is finding the courses. You know, spending your time going out and looking for what's available. And then, of course, time spent evaluating the courses, seeing are they appropriate for what you want to be doing. Uploading them into your LMS. I mean, there's an awfully big file. Some of these courses are, you know, 300 megabytes, and it takes time. Just, you know, if you have 100 courses to upload, it could take literally days to do it. And of course, the other cost that everybody knows about is the license cost. You know, there's the cost of the actual license to have the off-the-shelf courses. And then the soft cost would be things like the time spent searching, contacting publishers to get pricing. So, you know, you're looking for, say, anti-bribery. You find 5 companies in the UK that do that. You then have to talk to each of them, get evaluations, get demos, and then find out what the pricing is. And after you do that, I'm sure you probably all experienced this, that after you've talked to a vendor about a course, then you're going to be hassled by that vendor to try to buy that course from them. And if you do that 5 times, you're going to get five people wanting you to buy their course. And another thing is that what we found is certainly within the off-the-shelf market, there's 100 different pricing models. Everybody seems to have a different way of licensing the content. And it's very hard sometimes to compare apples to apples. And so the whole idea can take weeks to find evaluate, and decide which course you want to buy it. That was the time testing. So these are some more of the costs involved in finding off or sourcing off-the-shelf courses. So talk about now, you see a lot more of marketplace sites in other areas. For example, Amazon's had a marketplace for years. You can buy just about anything in Amazon. But you know, it's so popular because everything you want is there. People just go to Amazon and then can search for whatever they need. In the e-learning sector, there's other ones. For example, there's Learn Direct in a sense as that, although it's for using their LMS. So there's many more companies that are, you know, coming out recognizing the convenience of the idea that you can go to a one-stop shop and find a variety of courses, not just a single vendor's courses. But they often have a limited try before you buy or a limited preview, not the whole course that you want to look at as a buyer, as a training manager. And a lot of these marketplace sites are B2C. They're not necessarily B2B. They're e-commerce driven, aimed mainly at individuals and micro businesses. And they often talk about pricing of a single course. You know, they talk about this is one user and one course. But as a training buyer, a training manager, you're not interested in individuals. You're interested in buying courses for your entire audience. And also, I made this point before, that volume pricing is very rarely published in a open way. It's normally something you have to call to find out, and then work out how one course compares to another, how one vendor compares to another. Finally, looking at the biggest cost in purchasing off-the-shelf courses would be the license cost itself. And I think everybody's been familiar with what I call the traditional licensing model, which is where if your company has 500 users, we have 20 courses, it's going to be a price, £10,000 a year, something like that, you know, to use all the courses. That is what I would call the traditional licensing model, per user basis. And it's calculated total number of users, number of courses. It's what I'd call a traditional site license. Who's bought a license like that for off-the-shelf courses? Yeah, just one? Yeah. Okay. Until recently, really the only way of dealing with licensing, giving someone courses to run on their LMS has been with this sort of sledgehammer overall license approach. Because if I'm a publisher and I give you my course files, once you've got them on your LMS, I don't know what you're going to do with them. I don't know how many users are actually going to use them. You might have, if you have 5,000 employees and I give you my courses, then you've got the potential to use them for 5,000 employees. You may not be, but that's what you've got the potential for. And I've got no control or no reporting on what happens after that. And that's not to say that this is a bad model, because it often sometimes it works out really well. That if something like health and safety or compliance, where every user has to actually do the courses, the license cost, the traditional license model works very well in that situation. But often it doesn't. So we look at do a little case study. This is an actual client that we had. They had 350 staff. It was paying £7,000 a year for a library of 80 courses, which on the surface seems like a really good deal, doesn't it? That's 20 pounds per user for access to 80 courses. It's tiny cost per course. If everybody did every course that was possible to do, it would be incredibly good value. But at the end of the year, they worked out that only 56 people had accessed any of the learning, and in total there were only 78 enrollments, so a person in a course. So 56 people, some took more than one course. Working backwards, it worked out to £89 per course enrollment. So one person in one course, which is a crazy price to pay, because you could put people on classroom courses for almost that price. But that's the only way they could buy it, to do it that way. Has anybody had this experience when you've looked backwards? Or it's an interesting thing that people, you get to the end of the license and only then can you figure out what it's actually cost you per learner or per enrollment. You have to wait until the end of the year and then look at it. And often, more cases than not, there's a scenario like this that happens. And then you complain because the vendor, that you feel like you've been missold the product because you haven't got much use of it. It's not really the vendor's fault. The vendor's pricing a reasonable price if you use it. But the reality is things don't get used as much as they should be. So with SCORM, I guess everybody's familiar with SCORM when I talk about SCORM, the technology. In the old days, SCORM courses had to actually sit on the server with the LMS itself. There's new technology now that's been around for a few years, which allows the courses to sit on cloud servers, it's in the Amazon cloud or wherever, and what you get instead of all the course files is a little connector file, a SCORM package that is really just a shell that connects to the content server. And so what it looks like to the LMS is that it's calling a local course. It looks like you've installed the courses locally rather than, but you haven't. All you've done is installed a very small connector. But the advantage to doing this, it means that the course is tracked locally, so the provider can track what's happening with the course centrally, but also your LMS tracks the course as if it was a normal course in your LMS. And another big feature of that is that it can be updated centrally. So if a new version is released, as long as it's not changing the outcome of the course, for example, if it's, slide 26 has a spelling mistake that needs fixing, you can update it centrally, and everybody who's connecting to that course will just have the update. They won't have to do anything to re-upload the courses. So going on an aside, when I first made this presentation, I'd just been on a ski holiday, so I had a ski holiday theme, and I wanted for some food for thought, because what we're talking about is kind of similar to what happens with in the lift pass. Who's been skiing recently? Well, the last 10 years, really. And do you remember? Has anyone skied like more than 10 years ago? Well, you used to have this metal thing that you'd attach to your clothes, and it be stuck there, and it was a physical thing that someone actually had to read it, look at it, and make sure that it was before they had all the gates and the oyster style things. And now of course, it's everywhere you go has got these, which is identifying you as a skier and then whatever tariff you've got put on this card. But the interesting thing is that this technology has been around for quite a while, but they really haven't changed the business model around it. You're still buying the equivalent of what was the sticky thing that you stuck on you, because it gets by days. You know, you can have, it's a 3-day pass or a 5-day pass or a 1-day pass. But I want you to think about the different possibilities. Because it's an electronic system, what could you do differently than the way it's being done now? They've got new technology with the old model, but can you think of some other ways you can price the skiing? A pay-as-you-go, yeah, or a deposit. So one thing that you could definitely do would be put on I'm going to put 20 pounds on this, or probably euros, let's be fair, because we're not going to ski much in the UK. You know, put 20 euros in this, and a lift ticket is one single lift is, say, 3 euros, and maybe some lifts are more, maybe some lifts are 5 euros because they go higher up or whatever, and you could do it that way. That's another way. Any other ones? I guess you have to ski a bit to know to get this analogy, but the other. Oh, sorry. Yes, there is only that. You can have it so that it's limited. You can have more granularity in the way that you buy the tickets. Yeah, they do that. They do that now in a sense in these big resorts. You can get parts of the resort, but you could potentially do it on specific lifts as well. You could have it on specific lifts. I mean, the end result really is that you could have, there's all kinds of things you could do. You could do it by time. You could say, this is going to be valid from, today I want to ski from 9 till 1, and I want to pay those 4 hours. But you know what? At the moment, believe me, we were skiing with 2 young kids, and we couldn't do half days. We had to pay for the whole day to have the convenience of going when we wanted. But we never skied more than 3 hours in a day. And what I would like is the ability to say, well, actually, I want to pay by the hour. I want to put 50 hours of skiing on this card and do it that way. So when you change the technology, you have the ability to change the business model, but that doesn't mean people do it. So we've seen this stuff. Pricing hasn't changed. Oh, so I didn't. I skipped that one. So the same sort of thing applies to off the shelf. Having the technology change means that it's possible to do things in a different way. For example, charging for time actually spent in courses. Now, I'm not saying that's a very practical way, but that's a possibility. The central server knows how much time people are spending in courses. That's one way of doing it. Another way was sort of what you touched on with the deposit system. You could put a deposit in your account. I don't know what I'm going to use, but I'm going to put 5,000 pounds in my deposit, my behind the bar, and then as enrollments are made, the money could come out of it. And the more you put in, the more deposit you make, the better the price could be. And the model that we like to use is called enrollment-based pricing, which is where you're counting actual enrollment. So a person in a course, when they start a course, is an enrollment to that course, or a unit, if you want to call it that. So enrollment-based pricing would work like this. There's an incentive to prepay for more units, but no requirement to do so. So obviously, if you buy 1,000 units, you're getting a much better price than you would for buying only 100 units or enrollments. There's a time limit on them because I don't know if you found this, but certainly in our experience, the longer you give a person to do a course, the less likely they are to do it. If in classroom training, you don't have that problem. If you say to someone in a classroom course, you're enrolled in this course and you better show up, or it's costing the company. People understand it costs the company money, and they tend to show up for the classroom courses that you book in. They may not show up for the e-learning, especially if they feel they've got all year to do it. I'm going to give you access to 100 courses. You've got all year. Go ahead, do them. There's no pressure on them. So often what we find is customers that want, even 3 months is their standard length, but people come and ask for less because they want to put pressure on the learner to actually do the course, that this course is costing us 20 pounds or whatever, and they want the learner to actually do it. It counts down when the user first accesses a course. one adaptation you could have is that if you were doing a slightly radical pricing model, which nobody's taken up yet, would be to only pay by results. So the courses are free, but you pay to complete them. If you know what I mean. If that's what you're doing. I've seen that done with certificates. I have. I've seen where the courses are free, but to get the certificate, you got to pay £10 or something like that. Just again, it's another variant you could have. Well, that's it really. I mean, there's a quick presentation. I'm usually on the graveyard shift, so I don't want to keep everybody. Does anybody have any questions or any experience they want to share? Benefits that they get more, yeah. Ah. Yeah.
5 hours training, and if you use that, you get a double amount given to you free.
So tying it into wages, more or less. I mean, yeah. I mean that's outside of the scope of my presentation, but yeah, there are numbers of ways to get people to complete courses. What I'm looking at is the cost side of it, rather than the the incentivizing side. But there are e-learning rates typically are quite low, and this isn't addressing that directly, but at least it's saving money. It's not spending money for a big license fee when you're not going to use it all. And I will admit that if people do actually use all the things, if people really go out and use 4 or 5 of the courses they're supposed to use, everybody does it, a normal license is actually very cost effective. But in the reality, a lot of, and we support that as well, but what we found is a lot of people are very disappointed with traditional licenses because they've spent all this money, they've gone out, especially if it's their first time in e-learning, they've gone out and spend money on an LMS, money on content, the 20 grand, 30 grand in expenditure, and then the first year's results show like 100 people did something, and the board gets very upset by that expenditure with no result. Obviously, as you get more experience with e-learning, that you learn from your mistakes, and that you buy less and you do things differently. But what I'm talking about is the fact that technology can change the way that the model works, so it doesn't have to be the same. It doesn't have to be the way it's always been, just because that's how it was. Now we've got technology that allows us to try all kinds of different ideas out and different models. Any other questions or oh? Yes. Is that true? Well, it's certainly from the rise of the companies that are selling tools. You look at all the companies that are producing tools now, that there's a lot more easy to use, often web-based tools out there for creating e-learning, and there's a huge interest in creating it. Doesn't necessarily mean it's great content, but for the reasons I mentioned, people can think it's quite cheap to do it that way. Especially compared to the traditional license, when a company comes to you and says, yeah, you can have all my courses, it'll be £30,000 or whatever, and you think, wow, that's a lot of money, I'll just get my guy that does Captivate, I'll get him to write my courses for me, or something like that. But when you get into a more cost-effective pricing model, then the need to create your own could be a bit less, really, and especially with customizable courses, with editable courses, it's blurring the line between bespoke and off-the-shelf. That's where I see a lot of things moving from our perspective as a content supplier. Well, we work with lots of different content providers, but I see things moving that way. Yeah, we're seeing far more, and also in tenders, certainly in government tenders, it's now a requirement in a lot of tenders that the content has to be editable. They want the courses, but they want to edit them. Yeah. Now, whether, like with most tenders, they ask for things that they're never going to use. So that, whether people actually do the editing themselves is another question. But in the tender, they'll say, it has to be editable in some way. So I think people are looking more and more for that. Any questions? No? Oh.
People are actually talking about a one-off buy. when you say it gives you as much unlimited uses as you want, and you can pick your particular courses that you want. Let's say there's 3,000 courses online from that particular company, and then you have the ability to dip in and dip out what you want. And I would argue that is potentially a safe way in the initial way that you approach the learning. So you have the ability to dip in and dip out, so you only have to access it for perhaps a year with the ability to look at it later. That's what I've seen in a couple of the modeling. Have you looked at that solution?
We're considering it. The problem is when you deal with multiple vendors is how to distribute the money up between them. And the best value, if you're buying a particular product from, that you can get a much deeper discount because that company knows that you're buying that product. If you're spreading it out across, 30 different vendors, well, each one's only getting a small slice of the whole thing, so they're probably less keen to discount on that basis. And it's also still user-based. You still have to pay for the users that are going to use it. So if one user uses one course only, they're not getting as much as someone who uses several courses out of it. Yeah, and it would depend on the size of the organization. For a small organization, I think it's a really cost-effective way to do that. I mean, it's like the subscription, the lynda.com type model that you're referring to. I think that's what you meant. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for coming. If you have any questions, we're just there, not very far. And thank you for listening.